Folks, a couple weeks ago at the No Kings protest took place in the country. Others are being planned right now. At the top of the show, we talked about the boycott happened with McDonald's. There's a history of protests in America. It's real. My next guest has a new book out that lays all of this out. And so let's go. Gloria Brown, she's the author of A Protest History of the United States. She joins us right. Guys, can y'all please show the graphic? I need to see her book. Show the graphic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Here we go. So, author of A Protest History of the United States. Gloria, thanks for joining us. First and foremost, why'd you want to do this?
Because there have been so many people who had given of their lives and livelihoods through protests, and they do all the sacrificing, and we take advantage of what they've done, and then people forget all about them. And also, I wanted the new generations of protesters to learn the strategies and what went into making movements happen, as opposed to believing that protest was ineffective and they just given it up and only have like these, emotional protests, and it's over and say, oh, it didn't work because I didn't see change happen within 24 hours.
I was reading this one story. This was after the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. And this one brother was like, well, man, politics ain't nothing. I ain't voting, but I'm going to protest. And I'm like, protesting and not voting, your ass just going for a walk.
There are people saying, I'm going to protest, but they don't really understand that there is a very strong history of protest. And I always like to say the 8-hour work day came through protests. So what the laws are on the books, the Constitution ratified in 1789, the Bill of Rights in 1791, the 14th Amendment in 1868, those are words. What made it happen was litigation, legislation, and protest, or it would still just be nice words on paper. So people need to know that in order to vote, you're voting for something. Somebody's going to create laws. What do those laws mean if they don't have a reality behind them? The protest makes those laws into a reality to fit our lives.
I think as you lay out in the book, when you take the time to understand protest, it wasn't about a singular event. There was a strategy. And that's the thing that drives me crazy when I see people and they say, hey, we're having a protest. And I'm like, okay, why? What's the purpose? What's the plan of action? What are you going to protest this Saturday? What are you going to do on Monday? That's what drives me crazy.
And it's because it doesn't give the forefathers and mothers of protest any credit for all that went into it. I had the chance to go to Selma about a month or so ago. That's part of their 60th anniversary of the March Across the Edmund Pettus Bridge for voting rights. Those elders were high school students who took classes every week on nonviolent protest and philosophy and practice and tactics. Who was going to get arrested? Who was going to bail them out? This wasn't just a one and done. They did this for weeks over time while they were in school. So we need to understand the TV shows show one protest and then everything changes, when it took years for us to get voting rights.
Absolutely. And so explain, folk, that there's also an art to protesting. There's a process here. It ain't just, hey, let's just roll out there.
Some protests, for example, when George Floyd was murdered, there is an emotional impulse to go out and get that frustration out of you. But protests over time, if we look at it, whether or not it's protests for the labor movements, for women's rights, for racial justice, it's a strategy in which people decide where they're going to protest, how long they're going to protest. And then, like you said, what is the message? Because you're trying to persuade thought. You're just not trying to have an action. The action is supposed to lead to people being persuaded to your side. And that's why Martin Luther King was such a magical person when it came to protest. He knew how to use the media. He knew how to have strategies. And if one strategy didn't work, you had to tweak it for another one. There was so much more that went into it than people are seeing just watching these clips on television.
Go to my panel. Robert, you first.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for such an outstanding work. And as someone who's been active in the movement since I was about 17 years old, I think you're spot on when you talk about the way we educate people about the civil rights movement in particular, and in the workers' rights movement, etc. I always said this thing on my radio show that it's almost like we teach it as a fairy tale. That one day, Abraham Lincoln woke up and he decided to have lunch with Martin Luther King, and then they got on the Underground Railroad and rode to Washington, D.C. to do the I Have a Dream speech. And then Barack Obama came out and they all shook hands and racism was over. That's how they teach Black history in America. Can you really talk about the need for us to educate this next generation on the levels of work that went into planning Selma, that went into planning the Montgomery bus boycott, that went into planning the first March on Washington, et cetera, so that they will see that this is not a quick, I'm going to send out one tweet, I'm going to change my profile picture to Black in solidarity, I'm not going to go to Target this weekend, but it has to be part of a sustained movement.
And you're so right. It has to be part of a sustained movement, but there also has to be a vision for where people want to go. It's not just protesting against something, we're also moving towards something. So they're protesting against racism or protesting for voting rights. And what gets lost, I think, is that people are feeling this emotional need to protest against the regime that's in place right now in the White House. But what are we protesting for? What's the vision going forward? And whether or not it's the labor movement, protesting for the 8-hour work week, protesting for better wages, protesting for the a union at Amazon plants. So people have to protest for something as well as thinking they have to protest against. And I think the strategy in protesting for means that you have to have a message. You have to think about who's good at what. Not everybody is going to be a leader. You have to have a lot of foot soldiers. How are you going to do this? I tell people don't protest after sundown because that's when bad things happen. So that means you're planning a time for the protest. You're planning where you're going to protest, how long you're going to do it, and then having sit-ins. Why not use the sit-in? That hasn't been used in a long time. And I say, well, maybe sit in at Trader Joe's, sit in at these places in which protests are supposed to disrupt and inform and move towards something. So there were so many things that were going on. And as you said, the way they write the story today and have the movie version of it, people are wondering if they protest once, why isn't change happening overnight?
Rebecca.
Thank you. I'm concerned that 47 is going to incite social unrest, especially as we start to go into the heat and the height of summer. What are ways in which our community can stay safe if they choose to exercise their right to protest?
I'm glad you asked that. These are all brilliant questions. One of the things that happened after Kamala Harris had her election stolen, because I still believe there was voter suppression there that was not investigated, was that the onslaught of this regime was to instigate, was to have the shock and awe of all of this legislation through executive orders, and with the sense from the first term that they were going to use the National Guard. And I told people months ago he was going to use the National Guard, but in his first term, he said he was going to use it in South Chicago, the South Side of Chicago, against us, because Black people are the target. It just so happened that you had that uprising that took place in LA. That was not as large as it was made to seem, but all that you saw that happened in LA, I think is supposed to be targeted toward us. So my main concern becomes, as we look at the summer, people are saying, I'm tired, I don't want to protest. If we protest, that we're going to be injured. So we have to be very careful that when we rise up in ways that are structured so that it's not an instigation, but they're going to use anything as an instigation. I'm telling you that right now. And that's why the planning for it has to be is during the day, that people have the telephone number of attorneys, that the attorneys are not at the protests, that if we're going to be arrested, there's a plan to how we're going to use the arrest. And nonviolent philosophy has to be something that people want to do, not something we're just supposed to do because we're Black. But I think if we're not part of the protest, as they say, if you're not at the dinner table, you're probably on the menu. And the protests I've been to, our issues are not there at all. And I'll give you this example. When that helicopter and the plane collided in Washington, D.C., and he said it was DEI, no one stood up for us. And that's why I said I've got to be a part of a protest on President's Day, because with other people from New York City, New Jersey, to say you've got to do something. We've got to not be erased, because we're being erased right now. So it's difficult to balance out. Being quiet means that we get erased. How do we get our voices out there and stay safe? That's why I said it has to be during the day. It has to be much more planning than you saw in Los Angeles. That was just like this emotional outburst. And we have to have some leadership in this planning. And young people today don't want leaders. They want to do things that leaderlessly. I think we're going to have our message very clear, and we're going to have allies there with us.
But on that particular point there, I think is critically important. And I get this idea of leaderless protesting, but I'm sorry. Somebody has to lead. So you have to have a hierarchy. You have to be able to give orders. And I think that was one of the problems with Occupy Wall Street. We saw this as well with, the implosion of, frankly, Black Voters Matter, and they're still trying to, get that back. I get you want to have consensus, but at the end of the day, you're going to need some folk who are literally in charge, because somebody got to make decisions.
You're so right. And in my book, Protest History of the United States, I go from the indigenous resistance to European invaders to slave uprisings and the making of unions, all the way to women's rights and then climate change. And each one of those struggles within it they were done differently. The different leaders had different personality types. And I try to, as best I can, talk about the personality types of the Native American chiefs who were trying to negotiate, or when they did have to attack, and the different types of uprisings between Denmark Vesey and Nat Turner. But people have different personalities. But once again, there was some leader who was saying, this is why we're doing it. And in order to get the message out, somebody has to say what the message is. And you can have different ways of going toward that vision of what we want in the future. But people have to know what the vision is, and that means a clear message. And that's why I said Martin Luther King and others were very, very good, adept at getting that message out.
Tyler?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again. I had the honor of helping organize two March on Washington. So protests, and they're at the heart of my love language. So, and I always tell other young people, a protest without strategy is just a gathering. And as you said, Uncle Roland, if you got no plan, you just out there for a walk. And I believe that your book, reminds us of the rights that, they were fought for, they weren't handed down. And given today's climate, as mentioned by my fellow panelists, what lessons from historical movements should young activists keep in mind as they continue to fight for justice?
I think one thing to keep in mind, and thank you for that question, is that in my book, A Protest History of the United States, you get to see how there could be these long-term strategies. For example, the time between 1955 and 1965, as there was a fight for desegregation and for voting rights, that was 10 years, different leaders coming to the fore with different things, but they had the vision of desegregation. They had the vision of racial pride and uprisings, of uplift. And so there were different strategies involved. We know there were major differences between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, but they were both looking at how do we lift our people? How do we lift our communities? And so I would say you don't have to have the same strategy. You don't have to walk in lockstep, but the major thing is vision. In order for us to have unions today, there were struggles around unions. People lost their lives trying to create unions. And for me, labor organization is protesting against the way workers are being treated. It wasn't just one way in which people tried to create a union, but they had that as the vision, and different people worked toward that in different ways and strategies, and that's how you got to that vision. So people need to understand, as young folks, don't expect 100%, even 80% of people. It's usually about 10 to 20% of people are going to participate in any type of movement, and yet they are going to benefit from your struggle. So get over that. It hurts your feelings, but that's how it is. People are going to question your sincerity. They're going to question whether or not you know what you're doing. The leader doesn't necessarily have to be the best community organizer. There's got to be some song that brings people together. There must be a strong voice. There are so many different ways in which talents need to be distribute it so that you have a movement. It can't just be one person. We look at Martin Luther King, but there were many, many people who were involved in that movement to go forward. So different strategies, different personalities, a vision, and understanding the distribution of work so that you don't mind being a foot soldier. Everybody can't be the chief. Some people just have to be foot soldiers in this. So when you think about all of that and know it's not going to happen all at once, there are many things that may go forward, but it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. 2 steps forward, and always look for the 1 step back. And so you have your plan to when things go backwards, how to then pivot and go forward again.
All right, folks, the book is A Protest History of the United States. Gloria Brown is the author. Gloria, we surely appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Good luck with the book.
Thank you, sir.
All right, folks, as a reminder, Monday we'll be broadcasting live 11 a.m. from the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court when Bishop William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign, Repairs of the Breach, will hold their Moral Mondays in D.C. at the Capitol. They will have moral witnesses united against an immoral budget. They'll be gathering at 9 a.m. at Lutheran Church of the Reformation. And then they're going to be marching to the Supreme Court, holding the news conference there. They, of course, you see right here, the clergy is being asked to wear full vestments of their faith tradition. And again, it begins all at 11 a.m. We're going to be live on Monday morning, so y'all stay tuned right here to the Black Star Network. All right, gotta go.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. The window to invest in Fanbase is closing. We've raised over $10.6 million of our $17 million goal. That means there's room for less than 6,370 people to invest in Fanbase for the average amount. The minimum to invest in Fanbase right now is $399. That makes you an owner in Fanbase today. Go to startengine.com/fanbase to invest. Why? Because current social apps have taken advantage of users for far too long, with content suppression, shadow banning, harmful racist content, and no real tools for monetization and equity. Fanbase has over 1.4 million users and counting, allowing anyone to reach all their following and monetize their content from day one. Social media is the new TV, and whoever owns the apps that distribute that content have the opportunity to own potential billion-dollar companies. While big platforms with uncertain futures are failing to serve their users, Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now, invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the next generation of social media.